Welcome to this week's lecture on the stages of moral reasoning as outlined by Lawrence Kohlberg. Just kind of connecting with our unit this week, which is covering socialization and the socialization process, essentially how we learn our culture. I'd like to discuss an idea, a theory that was developed by social psychologist named Lawrence Kohlberg, beginning in the late 1950s with his dissertation work in graduate school and finishing up in the early 1970s with kind of the completion of multiple studies that were conducted in order to validate the theory and the ideas that were developed by Lawrence Kohlberg. So first off, I'd like to connect Kohlberg's theory with some previous work done by Jean Piaget. So Jean Piaget was a contemporary of Lawrence Kohlberg. Jean Piaget is someone who is studied quite extensively in psychology, clinical psychology, and social psychology as well, but we also look at Jean Piaget's work here in sociology, and Lawrence Kohlberg was particularly interested in Piaget's idea around moral judgment. So Piaget's most well known for his contributions around cognitive development, a multi-stage theory of cognitive development, that essentially asserts that we progress through stages of cognitive development throughout our life course as human beings. And so, very similarly, Lawrence Kohlberg is also presenting a multi-stage theory that spans across the life course, but instead of looking at cognitive development, the kind of complexity of the ideas that we generate and our ability to critically analyze and process new ideas, Lawrence Kohlberg is interested in moral reasoning, so how we understand what's right and wrong, good and bad, within a given social environment. So Lawrence Kohlberg expands Piaget's work on moral judgment, and these are some of the kind of basic ideas that Piaget put forth. So Piaget did establish the idea that young children consider rules as fixed and absolute. There's kind of this objective reality attached to rules, which defines the kind of moral compass for young children. And those rules and morality, by extension, are defined externally. So, what I mean here is that younger children understand rules as they're defined by authority figures, usually within their immediate social environment. So, George Herbert Mead might call these people the significant other, those that we have the closest and most extensive interaction with early on in life. And Piaget says that as children get older, they progress and they learn to kind of think about morality in a more circumspect, a more complex way, and so they start to think of rules as relativistic, meaning that those rules are really defined, by those who have power, and that those rules differ depending upon who's defining them, right? So parents might have different rules than wider authority figures in society. Different societies might have different rules and norms that guide behavior, and so this is where older children, maybe think the kind of teenagers, maybe high school students, start to think about rules as something that are not fixed and that maybe don't have objective reality, that are essentially defined within various social environments by those who have the power to do so. So Kohlberg's work, getting back to Kohlberg, Kohlberg says that humans progress through moral reasoning in a sequence of stages, that those stages are attained in an invariant sequence. There's no skipping, there's no reverting, meaning that the stages of moral reasoning are attained in a kind of linear fashion, meaning that we progress or not, or we don't progress through these stages of moral development, but there's no going back to the previous stage once a higher stage has been attained. There's no skipping one stage to move to an even higher stage of development, that this happens in a kind of somewhat predictable and linear fashion. Each stage of moral reasoning, and of course we'll discuss these in a lot more detail coming up later in the lecture, include qualitatively different modes of thought. So these are, kind of fundamentally different ways of thinking about morality, what's right and wrong, and problem solving. So generally, the thought process becomes more complex as we attain higher stages of moral reasoning. There is more kind of nuance to an individual's understanding of what's considered morally right and morally wrong, and that those understandings are fundamentally, at a basic level, different than the previous stage. One other piece here, and this kind of relates maybe to some of our work in future units on deviance and crime, that criminality, which is of course a form of deviance, and deviance refers to a violation of a social norm, a standard for behavior that exists in a given society. That criminality and deviance are a kind of result of incomplete moral development. They could also, though, be a result of complete moral development, and I'll give you an example of that when we get a little bit further here in this lecture. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the first stage of, the first level of pre-convention, of moral reasoning, which actually includes two stages within it. So we're going to be looking at three levels of moral reasoning, and within those three levels, we'll have about two stages for each level. So there'll actually be about 6 stages of moral reasoning. So I know it's a little bit complicated here, but this is how Kohlberg defined these stages. And in fact, some researchers, Kohlberg himself, has broken these stages down into even smaller pieces. And I've seen some models with as many as 12 or 16 even, different stages, distinct stages of moral reasoning. We're just going to look at the 6 stages within these 3 levels. So the first level of moral reasoning is called the pre-conventional level. So this is referred to as pre-conventional morality. And within the pre-conventional level, there are 2 stages. The first one that we'll discuss is called punishment and obedience. So punishment and obedience, or stage 1 within pre-conventional morality, is the most basic form of moral reasoning. This is the kind of moral reasoning that some argue humans may be born with. There are other researchers who might argue that actually pre-conventional morality is learned as well, and that humans are born as a blank slate with no morality. This is an open-ended research question. In fact, if you're interested in early childhood development, if you're interested in human development, these things, this is a kind of question that drives that field of study. So within stage 1, morality, one's understanding of what is right and wrong, is in fact based upon punishment, or the fear of punishment, or the desire to avoid punishment. So in this case, morality is defined entirely external to the individual. There's no kind of inner sense of what is right and wrong. What is right consists of what one is not punished for, and what is wrong consists of what one is punished for. So this is, getting back to the first slide, kind of similar to Piaget's idea that younger children really have this kind of fixed idea of morality that is defined externally. In this stage, you have this kind of rational, almost utilitarian exchange, where decisions are made to avoid punishment. So, to use a kind of example here, and this is a classic example that Kohlberg employs, this kind of dilemma around whether to steal, to save oneself, or to to save one's family, can be applied to understand each level and stage of moral reasoning. So in this case, we have a cute kid over here. Sorry, let me move my head out of the way. Who has, drawn all over his face with marker. And, of course, this is maybe not the worst thing that a toddler can do, but certainly it's probably violating at least some parents' rules. I'm sure there are parents out there, maybe even in this classroom, who don't like their kids to draw on their faces. And so, if this kid was not punished for drawing on their face with a marker, they might not, have any kind of notion that that behavior is unacceptable, is considered wrong, or is considered deviant. However, kind of benign or not severe the deviant behavior might be. This child, if they were not negatively sanctioned, punished, or told that this is not the right thing to do, might not ever develop that understanding. Conversely, if the kid was positively sanctioned, so if the parents or whatever authority figure is in this kid's life actually kind of supported, right, the behavior, or encourage the behavior, then the child would think that writing on their face with a marker is actually good behavior. So to use one more example, thinking about theft, a child does not steal because they expect to be punished by their parents, and this would be the main motivation for not stealing for a young child. Not because stealing is wrong, not because stealing might disrupt the social order, not because stealing might hurt someone else. At this stage of moral development, someone does not steal because they want to avoid punishment.